Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
This is Gabe Lyons. Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas podcast. And I'm so glad you are spending time with us today. Every week, we just love engaging in topics and conversations that are so important that could get overlooked, or you might miss them if you're just paying attention to social media, or you're paying attention to a 1 second, 1 minute, 30-second clip, TikTok, wherever you're getting content these days. These talks now seem long. 9 minutes. I mean, that's a long talk these days. It's a lot to listen to. I'm kind of being facetious. But in reality, it is hard to pay attention these days to some of these conversations and talks. And so we're grateful for you as leaders because you know how important it is that we gain perspective, that we learn from other people, that we continue to improve the ways in which we're seeing the world. And today's going to be no different. We're getting to hear from Tyler Burns, and the conversation and talk that he gave for us is called The Gift of the Black Christian Experience. And of course, February is Black History Month. And we wanted to kick off this month having this conversation and really framing it by inviting Tyler to share this talk and to share it in a way that helps us all think well about this month, about what it means to be a person of faith, to be Black, to enter into better understanding the perspective that some of our Black Christian friends are coming from. And we might not always get to hear it, but we're going to get to hear it today. And Tyler is the president of The Witness. It's a Black Christian collective that engages in religion, race, justice, and culture from a biblical perspective. He also is a co-host of Pass the Mic with Jamar Tisby and a lead pastor at All Nations Pensacola. So let's listen in now to Tyler Burns.
So nephew, tell me something. That's how the conversation began. I'll never forget my Auntie Violet leaning over our kitchen island and asking me this question at a family reunion over 13 years ago. I can remember it like it was yesterday. She asked, "You go to a Christian school, don't you?" I politely said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "So nephew, tell me something. What does your Christian education teach you about Black people?" Now, luckily for her and for everyone else, I had read 5 books that year. And so I was more than qualified to speak about the weightier matters of life, right? I'm educated. I am all of 19 years old. I know the way the world works. And so I leaned back and intook my auntie's question, and then I tilted my head to the side. I smiled in an affirming, if not condescending way, looked at my immediate family members and said, "I got this. Don't worry." And then I proceeded to give my perspective, which wasn't much of a perspective at all. And then my auntie, I'll never forget, she listened patiently, tilted her head to the side, and smiled too, but not in an affirming or condescending way. She smiled with that look that one of your family members gives when you're in trouble. And I didn't realize that I was in a little bit of trouble. She continued the question. She said, "Nephew, what does your Christian school teach you about how to treat the poor?" Because the Bible says a lot about how we should treat the poor, right? "Nephew, what does your Christian school talk and say about the criminal justice system? Because justice doesn't seem like it's reserved for us. Nephew, how does your Christian school talk about the Obamas and their family? Nephew, what do you do with the least of these? Because I thought Jesus said that if you care for the least of these, you're caring for him." And the questions came one after the other, and I was reminded that no one can concretize a concept quite like Black women can. And they came for what seemed like an eternity, and I had no answers for them. For the first time in my 19 years of living, I was forced to confront the seemingly contradictory condition of being Black and Christian. Now, to be clear, I was born black, grew up black in a black family, and was introduced to Jesus at an early age. But sometimes in the life of black Christians, we must confront this reality that Tom Skinner talks about. Tom Skinner once wrote that a black Christian and a black non-Christian will live in the same world and face the same exploitation. Being fully black and being fully Christian sometimes feels like a bit of a paradox. It's strange, especially in this cultural moment. At The Witness, we have the privilege of meeting thousands of black Christians every single year. And they are navigating this reality of what it means to be in the middle of the paradox of being fully black and fully Christian. And yes, some of the conversations are what you might imagine. We talk about the unaddressed consequences of white supremacy in this country. That's a worthy conversation, but that's not all we talk about. You know, black people can talk about more than just race, right? That's not all we talk about. We also talk about the paradox, and for some people, it's hard for them to understand how Jesus can be healer when they don't have adequate access to health care. For some, it's hard for them to understand how Jesus can be provider when their communities lack economic provision. For others, it is hard for them to understand how people can claim to love them but not care about their lives. It feels like a paradox. Now, the good thing and the good news for us is that we are not the first or the only group to have faced this paradox. The Bible is filled with people who had to operate and navigate seemingly contradictory identities. Ask Moses what it's like to be born of Hebrew heritage and be under Egyptian acculturation. Ask the Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what it's like to be removed from your land and oppressed and persecuted for real. Ask Esther what it's like to stand in between your people and the palace of power. You know who else we should ask? We should also ask our Latin American brothers and sisters what it feels like to be ignored. We should also ask our AAPI family what it feels like to be rendered invisible. We should also ask our First Nation indigenous people what it feels like to be forgotten. We're not the only people who have dealt with this, but we are just acquainted with the pain and grief. There is pain in the paradox of being fully black and fully Christian. Well, I figured that what I should do is I should go and find out my auntie's questions. I should find out answers to those questions. And I searched in all the typical places and I could not find any answers. I searched my Christian education and curriculum and no black people were present there. I searched the family Christian bookstores and all kinds of different chains and I couldn't find any black people there that were answering these questions. And I even searched the Christian conferences and they weren't even asking this question. And then I kept looking, and I came across some people who have navigated the same experience. I realized that the only people who can answer the questions are the people who have lived in this same experience. And I found a cavalcade. I found a list of black Christians who were navigating the paradox and who had done so far earlier than I was even thought of. I found names like Gardner Taylor and Henry Mitchell, Prathia Hall and Fannie Lou Hamer and Vashti McKenzie. And I said, why does the church not know about these names? Because if anyone can navigate the paradox, it's them. They know what it's like to be in the midst of being fully black and fully Christian. Why doesn't the church center black voices? Can the church talk about black issues without centering voices? And I'm not just talking about on a stage. What about our theology? What about our leadership? What about our ecclesiology? Black people can talk about science and psychology, economics and politics. We can talk about anything, race included, but why don't we see us present? Why are our voices not centered? And when you're in the midst of the pain of the paradox, you find something out being a black Christian. And it's something that Frederick Douglass, a man who many of you may have heard of, found out in the late 1800s. Francis Grimke tells the story of Frederick Douglass, and he's at this group of black Christian leaders, and he's talking with the pain of what it means to be in the paradox of black and Christian. He's saying, why hasn't God freed the enslaved Africans? Why hasn't God ended slavery yet? Why hasn't God brought us into full equality? Why hasn't God delivered us? And he was going on and on. The mythical figure was taking off his armor. And then a black woman by the name of Sojourner Truth, she stands up and interrupts him with the rhetorical question that changes the atmosphere of the room. She says, Frederick, is God dead? And the room was silent, just as you are silent right now. As they considered the weight of this question, And here's the thing about being black and Christian in the midst of a paradox. Yes, there's pain there. But if you ask any black Christian, are we alone? We would say no. Why? Because God is not dead. Just because we're in the midst of pain doesn't mean that Jesus is not in the pain with us. Here's the truth. When we were in the paradox, we found that Jesus met us in the pain of our paradox. And Jesus addressed our pain, but he also gave us power. This is the Jesus who can stand at the dead grave of his friend Lazarus and declare, I am the resurrection and the life. This is the Jesus who can shed tears and speak to the tomb. This is the Jesus who says, my God, why hast you forsaken me? And into your hands I commit my spirit. This is the Jesus who met us, and this is the black Christian tradition. We can stand up and say, like an Alabama preacher stood up on an April evening in Memphis, I may not get there with you, but I know that we as a people will get to the promised land. Like black women at the Montgomery bus boycott said, my feet is tired, but my soul is rested. See, in black Christian tradition, we can be prayerful and prophetic. We can be weeping and dancing. We can push for joy and justice. We can say we're not all right, but we gonna be all right. As black Christians, we can say that the night may be dark, but the morning is sure to come. It's a paradox, but we found power there. And I invite you to center black voices because you'll find pain, but not just pain, you'll find power. And even if you don't, we'll continue. We'll continue to say that Black Lives Matter to God. We'll continue to raise the banner. We will continue so our sons can be safe, so our daughters can be free. And so maybe the next time my aunt asks me a question, I can give a better answer. Thank you.
I hope you enjoy listening to Tyler. I mean, such an inspiring communicator, such heartfelt words. And when he concludes and says, in black Christian tradition, we can be prayerful and prophetic. We can be weeping and dancing. We can push for joy and justice. It's such an encouragement. And I know over these last few years, several of my African-American friends, we've had this conversation that there's a lot of people that haven't experienced maybe the suffering, haven't experienced some of the ways in which people might feel more oppressed today, who aren't just black, but maybe are white and are going through a different type of experience and feeling like a minority, maybe as Christian folks and leaders, feeling a little bit like the views we hold don't hold up as well in society. People don't like them as much. And that there's so much we can learn from our Christian brothers and sisters who are African-American, who've walked a path historically where they have always felt this type of oppression. They've always felt like they are the minority. They've always felt like they've had a bigger uphill climb than other people, and yet have done it with being prayerful, with being prophetic, with weeping and dancing. But they've done it with joy. And if you have never been around an African-American group of friends, a community, a church, the joy that emanates is just beautiful and it's breathtaking. And I think for all of us, we can learn so much by just better understanding the history and the story, and encourages all of us that this is the way in which we live, no matter what we come against, no matter what is before us, even if we don't understand it and didn't deserve it, we can understand that we must be people of joy. So thank you, Tyler, for sharing this word with us. I hope you have a wonderful week.